Hello, my name is Louisa, and I had the great honor to participate in this year's travel grant of the Schwarzkopf Foundation, which basically means that they provided me an Interrail pass and I could travel around Europe while exploring a topic of my choosing. And this topic was actually inspired by a Netflix TV show, which is called The Empress. You should watch it if you haven't. The TV show is centered around the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Sissy. I was just really inspired by the fashion, and I asked myself, the fashion is so great, but you only see the fashion at court, so what are the common folk actually wearing? And then I asked myself further, since the Austro-Hungarian Empire contains so many different ethnic and cultural groups, how is the fashion? And were the different ethnic groups pressured to assimilate into a national imperial identity? And thus, did traditional dress become a quiet form of resistance? Yes, but first, a small disclaimer. I am not a scientist, and in no way do I have the means to actually make a scientifically accurate video about historical fashion, but I still hope you can enjoy it. So the preparations I made for this journey were mainly I planned travel route, the places where I definitely wanted to go. I also researched about some local folk art festivals that I could go to. I did a little bit of research, like which museums I could go to, if I could find any people I could interview. Yes, and simply got a bit familiar with my topic, and that was everything I did for preparations. The first stop of my journey was in Austria, in Vienna. Since it also was just a stopover for a few hours on my way to Bratislava, I didn't have time to explore much. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was also known as the Habsburg Empire. It existed between 1867 and 1980. A single monarch reigned over two sovereign states and was both the Emperor of Austria and the King of Hungary. This was also known as the dual monarchy. The probably most known one is Kaiser Franz Josef I, but only because of his wife, Elisabeth, or she was also known as Sissy. She was a fashion icon and inspired many, many different movies and TV shows. So in Slovakia, I went to Bratislava and to Zda. There I went to the Museum of History. Sadly, in the museum there wasn't a lot about traditional attire, so for this I mainly had to rely on internet research. The traditional folk dress in Slovakia is called kroje, and it varies from village to village and region to region. The kroje reflects the custom of the rural community and traditions, since it was handmade. The kroje consists of several pieces, a blouse with a vest on top, all embellished with traditional embroidery. The special embroidery techniques were passed on from generation to generation. The skirts were often multi-layered with aprons, and the aprons were embellished with embroidery as well. The embroidery on these aprons was also be used to show their marital or social status. The headdress also showed a woman's marital status. Married women wear intricate head coverings, while unmarried women wear flower head coverings. Slovakian men traditionally wore shirts with vests on top, all embroidered. The pants they wore were traditionally embroidered around the waists and the cuffs. And on their heads, they usually wore hats. So the next part of my journey was from Zda to Budapest. In Budapest, I spent some wonderful days looking at the ethnographic museum. I also went to some local shops where they were selling textiles and clothes with traditional Hungarian embroidery, which was very cool. But for sure, the most interesting and exciting thing for me was the Festival of Folk Art, where you could see traditional dress. They even showed you how they were made. Yeah, it was just very exciting. So the Hungarian traditional folk costume actually originated from the Magyar tribe, Their traditional clothing was made for mobility and to be very flexible since they were mostly warriors and rode a lot on horses. The traditional Hungarian folk costume is called nebviselet. I hope I said that correctly. The women traditionally wear a blouse with a bodice on top. Both is embroidered with flowery motifs. Over the skirt, they traditionally wore an embroidered apron, and they sometimes also wore scarves. Men typically wore linen shirts and the waistcoat, both embellished with embroidery. They also wore linen pants and hats with feathers or other kinds of adornments. The way you dressed could also indicate your marital status. Older women traditionally wore darker clothing and headscarves. Married women also covered their heads. Brides usually wore white dresses with embellishments and rosemary, since it was a typical wedding adornment. But here again, each region has a unique and different style that gets passed down from generation to generation. One very distinct and beautiful style is the Catalostic folk costume, which originates in Transylvania. But nowadays it's actually a part of Romania. But it's still associated with Hungarian culture. The people who live there use the Catalostic folk costume actually to feel closer to their Hungarian heritage. The folk costume is known for a lot of intricate beadwork, embroidery, and a lot of floral motifs. So the next stop of my journey was Croatia. In Croatia, I went to Zagreb and to Rijeka. For my research, I mainly went to the Ethnographic Museum and to the Museum of Unfinished Art, as well as a local market. The traditional Croatian folk costume for women consists out of a shirt with a skirt with an apron on top, and women usually also wore embroidered headscarves. Men traditionally wore linen shirts and pants with embroidery details. Here again, the folk costumes vary from region to region, but Croatia can be divided into three cultural regions: the Pannonian, the Dinaric, and the Adriatic region. In the Pannonian region, the folk costumes are mainly made out of home-woven linen and have a great number of the Old Slavic heritage. Some of the accessoires are heritage of the steppe nomadic clothing inventory. In the Dinaric mountain territory, the main occupation was cattle breeding. That is why mostly sheep and lamb wool was used for clothes. The clothes were decorated with embroidery and metal jewelry. The traditional headdress of the region was a red cap for women and men alike. Men also wore a special waistcoat that was decorated with silver plates and ornaments. Because of the turbulent borders, people often wore weapons and also armored-inspired pieces. In the Adriatic region, the clothes were mostly made out of wool. The region was also heavily influenced by the Dinaric region, the Orient, and Mediterranean. Here at the borders, weapons were also worn due to conflict. In Croatia, color also carried a certain meaning. White was typically a color for mourning, but also for elderly women. Traditional wedding dresses were decorated with red embroidery, with red here symbolizing youth, health, and fertility. Women usually stopped wearing red ornaments after they have given birth, and rather opted for clothing of darker shades. So in Slovenia, I only went to Ljubljana, where I went to the Museum of Ethnography. The traditional Slovenian dress is called the Narodne noše. Women traditionally wore a blouse with a bodice on top, both embellished with embroidery. They also wore skirts with aprons on top, often with floral motifs, and on their heads they often wore headscarves with embroidered edges. Men typically wore shirts with vests, often decorated with embroidery. For trousers, they mostly wore woolen trousers, and on their heads they usually wore hats adorned with feathers or ribbons. And also in Slovenia there is a special wedding attire. Brides traditionally wore white dresses with embroidered details and accessoires like the bridal headband or a bridal crown. Men typically just wore their regional attire. But again here, the traditional attire varies from region to region. In 19th and early 20th century Europe, traditional folk dress became a declaration of identity. It showed who the people were and also showed who they refused to become. As imperial authorities were encouraging a cultural uniformity under Vienna and Budapest, a lot of people started wearing their regional costumes more frequently. Through this movement, traditional dress actually transformed into a sign of political resistance and a statement of belonging and endurance. A lot of historians also describe this movement as nationalizing of peasant costume. This is actually a European-wide pattern where intellectuals and also museums and a lot of revival movements use traditional dress to represent authentic people that were very distinct from the imperial center. Also among the Slovaks, the kroš stood as a symbol for resistance. During the national revival, folk embroidery and patterns from different regions were displayed at cultural local gatherings. Each design here represented their identity, especially their local identity. It stood as a strong symbol against the defined Kingdom of Hungary's push for Magyarization. In villages and on festival stages, Slovaks made a stand and showed that they are not Magyar, they are Slovaks. Magyar standing here for Hungarians. So Hungary's story is a bit more complex. Here, the traditional dress actually made its whole way to actual royal court. A big inspiration for this was actually Empress Elisabeth, or as you also got to know her, Sissi. Her 1867 coronation gown actually had some Hungarian ornaments implemented in the design. Thus, she actually turned fashion into politics, which during that time, especially for females at court, was quite unusual. The gown's design borrowed motifs from hussar uniforms and pearl string braids that are actually typical for Hungarian national dress. Magyar elites actually got inspired by her example and also started wearing traditional clothes at official events as a proud act of national visibility. In Croatia, ethnographers that were tied to the Yugoslav Academy actually worked to preserve and celebrate national garments. A lot of different figures actually documented these garments in detailed studies, while later other scholars displayed them in exhibitions that championed local craftsmanship over imported Viennese taste. Each national dress actually became a symbol, again here, that Croatia is a culturally distinct nation. In Slovenia, the Gorenska narodna noša, a form of traditional dress, became a national symbol. Revivalists and painters promoted this costume at patriotic festivals in Ljubljana. This folk costume was supposed to represent the true Slovene, which should contrast sharply with Viennese fashion. To wear this national dress out in public would actually mean to choose your own heritage over the empire. So actually all of these examples show that these traditional costumes weren't costumes at all. Rather were they actually a symbol of resistance. It was a big statement that you choose your own heritage over the empire. But through this resistance and this wearing, they actually kept their heritage alive for us to still admire today. The traditional folk dress has undergone a lot of change during the industrialization. The availability of mass-produced garments significantly increased. This led to a shift in fashion from traditional handmade attire to mass-produced, more simple garments. This shift first arrived in the city, but slowly it also made its way to smaller communities. Nowadays, hardly anyone wears a traditional dress that is handmade on a day-to-day basis. Also, the process of making these garments all from scratch gets lost with the newer generations. I had a talk with a Croatian woman. Sadly, I didn't have permission to put it in this video, but she told me that her grandparents still made all their clothes from scratch. Nowadays, no one in her family knows how to make traditional clothing all by themselves. But even though the traditional folk dress has lost its role as a daily attire to wear, it still has significance. I attended festivals and local markets where people were still wearing their dress and displaying it for other people to see. But it's actually mostly elderly people who still keep the traditions alive. On the Folk Festival of Arts in Budapest, there were a lot of elder women who showed their craft, and you could also ask them to teach you. It was a bit difficult with the language barrier, but it was very cool to see how the garments are actually made and to see the craft and the work that actually goes into all these different techniques and clothes. Also in Croatia, I went to the Museum of Unfinished Art. It's definitely a recommendation if you are ever there, where I had a talk with the owner and she taught me a bit about traditional Croatian embroidery, which is super complicated. But it was so cool to see that she actually tries to get a lot of people inspired to get into embroidery, even though she just teaches the simple stitches. But I mean, that's where you start. And I also see it still as a good way to actually teach young children about their culture and heritage. So, all in all, even though the traditional dress is not present in the day to day life, it is still celebrated and it still remains a symbol of tradition and culture. And nowadays, also a lot of designers are actually taking their cultural heritage as an inspiration for their designs. An example for this is Jana Gavalkova from Slovakia. She designed the dress for Miss Universe 2012. For the dress, she used a special blue dyeing technique and displays stylized Slovakian motifs, which were reminiscent of traditional Slovakian gowns. Another example for this is Lucia Kejza from Slovenia. She used traditional tailoring techniques, textiles, and details. This makes her a good example of a designer who uses the techniques and materials rooted in Slovenian traditional culture, rather than just visually representing those garments. An example from Croatia are Vesna Mikovic and Maria Mikovic. They have a brand called Etnoboutique Mara, and their goal is to promote Croatian ethnic heritage and traditional crafts through fashion. Their collections combine modern urban fashion with motifs drawn from folk costumes of various Croatian regions. Another example from Hungary is Red Medium. She uses traditional Hungarian embroidery and puts it on modern silhouettes. Yes, and definitely check out her Instagram page because there are so many cool clothing. I would have bought everything if I had money, but yes, definitely check out. And also sometimes there are summer sales, so yeah, go get wild. Now here to my struggles of this whole video project. One of them is I think that I just chose a topic that was too broad. I think I should have actually just centered my video around either just resistance through fashion or fashion back then and nowadays, but both together in like such a short video. I have the feeling like one came a bit short. Another thing is I probably should have just focused on 2 or 3 countries, not 4. When I was there, I was just hell-bent on like going to all the 4 countries, which in retrospect wasn't such a good idea. Another problem I had with this topic is that it's a bit of a niche topic and it was really hard to find people who actually knew a lot about it. Like for the fashion part, I actually did find people who knew about it, but for the resistance part, it was quite hard. And also like, so I mainly had to rely on internet research. Another problem with this whole journey is like city trips in general are just very, very draining. and especially if you travel for like a longer time and you just run from city to city, and it's summer, it's hot, and you just jetting through the city like completely sweating. That's just like super exhausting. I also got sick during my travels, which wasn't really great, but I mean I pulled through, so it's fine. All in all, I would say I definitely recommend doing this. It's like so much fun, and it's such a great opportunity to just invest yourself into something that you're really interested in while also traveling. But definitely plan your journey ahead. Choose a topic that's not like too much. Choose a topic where you can actually interview people. Also do your research beforehand before you go, so you already know where to go. Yes, all in all, I am actually so grateful that I was able to do this journey. I hope you enjoyed this video of me just yapping about fashion for 20 minutes. And ciao!